actually doing something about it. Now you have Dr. Oz going in, again, I think partly because of Nick Shirley's revelation that a third of the hospice centers in America were in Los Angeles County. So the way we prevented that fraud is we stopped funding 400 of them, and not one of those hospice centers complained.
Welcome back to Freedom Forge, where we defend faith, family, freedom, accountability, and the constitutional values that built America. Before we begin, hit the like button, subscribe to Freedom Forge, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our latest reactions from Washington. Today, we're looking at a Senate hearing focused on federal waste, fraud, and abuse, and whether government agencies are doing enough to protect taxpayer dollars. Senator Ron Johnson questions independent journalists Nick Shirley and James O'Keefe about alleged fraud involving government-funded programs, healthcare providers, NGOs, petition signatures, voter registration, and the role independent journalists can play in exposing potential wrongdoing.
Round of questions. I'm going to defer my time to Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've had in testimony and opening statements a couple jabs, I guess, at Nick Shirley's videos. The only reason that we're taking fraud seriously is because of that independent journalism sitting in front of us. The fact that he exposed in all its gory detail how grotesque and how blatant this fraud is, how rampant it is. So, Mr. Hetler-Gaudet, listen, I agree with most of your prescriptions here. Chairman of the committee, we had you testify. I've been trying to support of Inspector Generals. Now we've had to, got a couple of Inspector Generals resigning ahead of the posse because they're certainly not perfect as well. The problem I have with all the prescriptions is it hasn't worked. The lowest estimate I hear fraud in the federal government is $250 billion a year. I think you said 230. We had in a subcommittee hearing LexisNexis saying it's $1 trillion. It wasn't really until this administration with DOGE, which is, that effort's also been denigrated here, that we started going in there and actually doing something about it. Now you have Dr. Oz going in, again, I think partly because of Nick Shirley's revelation that a third of the hospice centers in America were in Los Angeles County. So the way we prevented that fraud is we stopped funding 400 of them, and not one of those hospice centers complained. So it's the tip of the iceberg. Mr. Shirley, again, I commend you on your phenomenal journalism. Quite honestly, when I saw that happening, I go, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't my staff do those videos? Journalism is crucial to this. You're a partner in what we need to do. And it's only because of those videos that expose it that we have any chance of trying to rein in this beast. But you mentioned the Stop Nick Shirley Act. What is that? Can you describe that in greater detail?
Yeah, so that's a bill that's been created by Mia Bonta, the wife of the Attorney General of California. And the official title is AB 2624, and it's to make it essentially illegal to expose and to film outside of immigration support service providers. That means any entity that provides services to illegal migrants, whether that be healthcare or legal fees. If I were to go out and film a video in front of one of these locations, perhaps an NGO like Churla that's received over $80 million from the government, and they give me a piece of paper and they say, hey, you cannot publish that video. If that bill passes, it'll be illegal for me to. So it
really ought to be renamed the Protect Medicaid Fraudster Act. Would probably be a better description of that, correct?
Correct.
Why do you think you have such pushback from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, from just the denigration here from the ranking member, from Governor Newsom? Why is that? You would think trying to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse would be a completely nonpartisan issue.
Because they quite frankly need the fraud. They actually need the fraud.
Mr. O'Keefe, and I've got a lot more questions, but I'm not understanding. What were these petitions about? You really have they were paying money for signatures on petitions, generally pushed forward by non-governmental organizations, which, by the way, we don't track how much money is expended. Of the $7.5 trillion expended this year, we have no idea how much funnels eventually through NGOs. But so you have paying dollars for signing petitions, and then you also have paying dollars for voter registration. Have you kind of followed that through? What's that all about?
Yes, Senator. One is a California state crime to fraudulently sign in someone else's name to get something on the California ballot initiative, and the other is a federal crime, where there's federal jurisdiction where you pay someone in order to get them to register to vote.
So again, these are petitions to get something, a referendum, on the ballot in California.
That's correct.
So what didn't make sense to me about the registrations is they were signing up fake names or fake addresses. I would think, how if you're going to really commit election fraud, you'd sign up legitimate names, legitimate addresses, so that you could basically harvest those ballots and vote for who you wanted to vote. I mean, have you kind of followed that whole?
Yes. In one instance, we looked over the shoulder, and a petitioner logged into a website, something called sigvalid.com, and accessed currently registered voters using their real names and real addresses. We were unable to determine or ascertain what this sigvalid.com is, but we believe that your committee has subpoena power to try to find out what that is.
Well, that'd be my offer. Both Chairman Paul and myself have subpoena power. If you need it, we're more than happy to use it. So I'm making that offer to both Mr. Shirley and to you, Mr. O'Keefe.
We'll follow up with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right away, Senator Johnson makes a point that should matter to every American. Independent journalism can play an important role in government accountability. Johnson praises Nick Shirley's reporting and argues that his videos helped bring allegations of widespread fraud into public view. Whether you agree with every conclusion Shirley reaches or not, Americans should support the principle that journalists have the right to investigate where taxpayer money is going. Government should never become so powerful or complicated that citizens are afraid to ask questions. Johnson then discusses estimates of federal fraud reaching hundreds of billions of dollars annually. He mentions roughly $250 billion as a lower estimate, while referencing testimony suggesting potential losses could be much higher, depending on how fraud is measured. Just think about that. Even if the exact number is debated, we're potentially talking about an extraordinary amount of taxpayer money. That money doesn't magically appear in Washington. It comes from Americans working jobs, operating businesses, paying taxes, and trying to provide for their families. That's why conservatives constantly talk about limited government and accountability. When Washington controls trillions of dollars through thousands of programs, agencies, contractors, nonprofits, grants, and subcontractors, tracking every dollar becomes increasingly difficult. Johnson also discusses efforts under DOJ and federal officials investigating questionable spending. He points to hospice providers in Los Angeles County and claims hundreds stopped receiving funding without complaining. If that account is accurate, Congress should investigate exactly what happened. But here's the standard conservatives should demand: follow the evidence. If providers were legitimate, they deserve due process. If people deliberately defrauded taxpayers, prosecute them. Accountability should never depend on political affiliation. Then the hearing gets even more interesting. Johnson asks Nick Shirley about what Shirley calls the Stop Nick Shirley Act. Shirley identifies California Assembly Bill 2624 and claims it could make certain filming or publication involving immigration support service providers illegal. Any law potentially restricting journalists from documenting publicly visible activity deserves serious First Amendment scrutiny. That doesn't mean journalists have unlimited rights to trespass, harass people, or violate legitimate privacy protections. But government-funded organizations should not automatically be protected from lawful public scrutiny simply because their work involves a politically sensitive issue. If an organization receives millions of taxpayer dollars, Americans deserve transparency about how that money is being used. Johnson jokingly suggests calling the legislation the Protect Medicaid Fraudster Act. That's political rhetoric. But underneath, it is a legitimate question. Should organizations receiving government money face more scrutiny or less? I say more. Then Johnson asks Shirley why he believes there has been political resistance to his investigations. Shirley responds with an explosive claim. They actually need the fraud. That's an enormous accusation, and this is where evidence becomes essential. If politicians, organizations, contractors, or political networks knowingly benefit from fraudulent government spending, prove it. Trace the money. Produce the records. Bring witnesses before Congress. If crimes occurred, refer the evidence to law enforcement. Conservatives should never settle for accusations when we have an opportunity to establish facts. Johnson then turns to James O'Keefe and questions him about alleged irregularities involving petition signatures and voter registration. Election integrity should not be partisan. Every eligible American should be able to vote. Every legitimate vote should count. Nobody should be illegally registered. Nobody should have their identity misused, and nobody should manipulate the petition process. O'Keefe describes an incident in which his investigators allegedly observed someone accessing a website called sigvalid.com and viewing information connected to registered voters. He says they were unable to determine exactly what the website was and suggests Congress investigate further. And Senator Johnson gives perhaps the most important response of the entire exchange. He offers congressional subpoena power. That's exactly where allegations should go next. Don't just create viral clips. Investigate. Find out who operates the website. Determine where the information came from. Determine who accessed it. Establish whether anything illegal occurred. If the allegations are false, tell Americans they're false. If they're exaggerated, correct the record. But if they're true, hold the responsible people accountable. Americans are tired of congressional hearings where explosive allegations dominate the headlines for several days and then disappear without answers. This hearing also demonstrates why independent journalism matters. Journalists shouldn't exist to protect Republicans or Democrats. Their job should be challenging powerful institutions and exposing wrongdoing wherever they find it. As conservatives, we should apply that standard equally. If a Democratic administration wastes taxpayer money, expose it. If a Republican administration wastes taxpayer money, expose it. If a progressive organization commits fraud, investigate it. If a conservative organization commits fraud, investigate it. The law should not care which political party someone supports. And there's a larger lesson here about the size of government.